So I thought Ben and Julian's talks were fantastic, and I was listening to them the whole way through and coming at things from quite different perspectives, from the national tourism impact perspective through to the very local community impact. As architects, and I live in Inverness and we practice throughout the Highlands. We in particular work on a lot of tourism, heritage, culture projects. So the Urquhart Castle Visitor Centre, to more recently the Gairloch Heritage Museum, which we completed in 2020. We're currently on site on Hoy doing the Scapa Flow Visitor Museum, and we're working closely with the Crannog Centre Trust that Ben mentioned on their project to relocate their museum to the other side of the loch. And all of these projects have multiple strands of community impact, interpretations of history and heritage, and involving the public. I'm going to talk to you specifically about Inverness Castle, and I think it's quite pertinent in the context of what's already been said. It's the start and end point of the North Coast 500, as well as the Loch Ness 360 and the Great Glen Way and other long distance trails. And obviously being within Inverness, it has this connection to the wider Highlands. Often visitors will come to Inverness and spend one night or 2 nights and then go off and explore elsewhere in the Highlands and come back to Inverness. So it's got quite a transient group of visitors, and the castle will play a central role in that, and hopefully directing people to places in the Highlands that can support these sustainable regenerative forms of tourism. Okay, so the place itself, I often start with a slide here, which is what you get if you type Inverness into Google, which is most often the way that people now engage with a place before they visit it physically. And you can see that Inverness Castle is the image of Inverness. It's the icon of Inverness. And when Google tells you things to do in Inverness, it says you should go to the castle, despite it being a private courthouse until very recently. You should go to the cathedral, which is just on the opposite side of the river. And you should go to the museum and art gallery and do walking tours. And the latter two of those are both situated right next door to the castle. So it's a natural gravitational point for visitors. For anyone who doesn't know Inverness, and I'm going to assume most of you do, but it sits on top of a hill right in the centre of the town, at the junction of the 4 main historic streets of Inverness: Bridge Street, Castle Street, Church Street and the High Street. And so it's always had this central position. As such, it's always been the seat of power in Inverness. We know that a castle has existed on the site from the 12th century, but most probably before as well. And over the ensuing 500 years, it's captured, besieged, burnt, demolished and rebuilt on a number of occasions. They say it's long been the physical and symbolic seat of power in the north of Scotland, and as such, it's witnessed the shaping of Scotland's, and in particular the Highlands' present-day social, political and economic landscape. And I think it's a really symbolic moment in time at the moment, because for the first time in the site's history, or site's occupied history, it's going to switch from being a private place of defence, fortress or civic function into a public place. It's being handed over to the public. I think that's really quite symbolic. A very quick potted history of the site, because it is fascinating, but in 1228 Inverness is burnt, and that includes the castle on the site is burnt in 1228. 100 years later, it's captured by Robert the Bruce, and he orders the demolition of the new castle that's been rebuilt on the site, because it's a symbol of English power in the north of Scotland. So that's another time that it's demolished. In 1412, the Earl of Mar builds the first stone castle. 1562, Mary, Queen of Scots, lays siege to Inverness Castle after being refused admittance by Alexander Gordon, and he's hung for refusing her admittance. And again, the castle is besieged and in part destroyed. I've got a map here from 1590 by Timothy Pont. I'm sure a lot of people know Pont's maps, but I think it's an interesting image because it shows, even at this time, Inverness is shown as a kind of guddle of small buildings sitting on the side of the river, but the castle is depicted as the main visual marker in the town. Again, in 1649, it's besieged. You see the pattern of things happening here. Citadel built in 1652 by Oliver Cromwell. And I've got an engraving here from 1693, which is romanticized a bit. Everything's exaggerated. But again, it just talks about this place as being the most significant site in Inverness and the one that rose above the town. It's blown up again by the Jacobites in 1715. And in 1726, it becomes Fort George. So anyone who knows the area will know that Fort George sits along the coast at Ardesir. Previous to that, it was sited on the site that the castle now sits. And it was blown up. And hopefully you can now see a survey map of the site just after Fort George is blown up, and all of these boulders are recorded locations, and you can see them even lying in the gardens of the houses below Fort George. But this was the last physical occupation of the site before Inverness Castle that we know today. So after Fort George is blown up, the people of Inverness quarry the stone illicitly, and it goes into a lot of the buildings around Inverness and around the site, because the Crown area is expanding at the time. They're building a lot of Victorian development. So the stone gets quarried. It then lies as an open site for about 50 years before the courthouse is built. And this is a map of the site just prior to the buildings that occupy it today. Inverness Castle is actually two buildings. The original courthouse, which was built in 1836, and the prison to the north. The prison was built about 12 years later. It was converted then into offices and more court accommodation soon after. The court building is more or less intact in its original form today. It's a highly symmetrical building by William Byrne, which can be seen here. This is the rear elevation of the court building. Whereas the prison building is a lot more nuanced. It housed about 26 individual cells with a triple height corridor down one side, from which you could stand at the bottom and see all of the cell doors. It's then been converted and chopped and changed multiple times in its history, so it's quite difficult to read the prison if you visit the building today. I'm just going to speed up slightly because I can see the time ticking on. There's some images here of the castle sitting as this big object on the plinth before everything has grown up around it today, and Bridge Street's changed a lot and the bridge has changed itself, but it was this medieval looking castle, but actually quite a modern castle, which grew out of a girdle of buildings. And up until relatively recently, actually, this is 1945, post-war, Castle Street was a two-sided street. Anyone who lives in Inverness will probably know it as a one-sided street with a grassy embankment down the side of the castle. But the castle used to be much more enclosed, and the Castle Street shops and flats above extended the whole way up to the entrance to the castle esplanade. This is the castle today. And in terms of archaeology, where we are in the project just now is that we've carried out, so we're designing a new visitor attraction. Inverness Castle is going to become a visitor attraction. It's part of a wider master plan for the town. And we've carried out an enabling contract this summer, to do lots of investigations, and you'll hear about those in the film. But we did quite a lot of archaeological digs. AOC undertook these for us. The site, because it's had this history of castles being burnt and besieged and rebuilt, has actually been scraped and many times through its life, and so there was actually relatively little that we found. We did find some old walls which used to form the airing shelters and the prison grounds, but probably came from Fort George previous to that, and they were built upon. This is on the north side of the castle. In between the two castle buildings, though, really the ground has been changed over and dug up so many times that anything of archaeological interest really has gone, which is a real shame. Did find very small fragments of interesting things. This is sections of an 18th century bowl which were discovered on the north side. So the plans for the future, as I say, Inverness Castle is going to become a visitor attraction. It's phase one of a wider master plan for the Castle Hill area. So it's seen as a regenerative project for Inverness, but definitely a gateway to the Highlands. This is the castle here in plan, and you can perhaps see that there are part of a master plan proposals to redevelop Bridge Street on the north side, and also Castle Street on the east side. We at the moment are only involved in the castle project itself, but this is just to set it in context. This little 3D diagram describes those three phases of development, but I'm sure they will look radically different to this. This is just diagrammatic. The castle itself, as I say, becomes a new gateway. We're restoring Category A listed buildings and providing a world-class heritage-led attraction and local resource. Then the second phase of the master plan is to redevelop Castle Street, which replaces that missing piece of the city block, reactivates the west side of Castle Street, and provides improved universal public access to Castle Hill. And the third phase, Bridge Street, is the transformation of an underperforming piece of city centre fabric, vastly improved public realm, promotion of new connections and mixed-use facilities. And these are some doodles that you might be able to see if you go up to the castle just now on some of the hoardings that describe some of the plans around the castle. So our proposals refurbish, restore and transform the castle buildings, and also insert a new link building between the two to connect them and create one place for the first time. But also redevelop the external areas around the castle, including a new deck on the west side which overlooks the river. This is an image of inside the link building, which will become hopefully a hive of activity and public presence. Okay, so I've counted through that. I realise it's just gone 2 o'clock, but Andrew, if it's okay, I can play the film, or we could take questions and then play the film for people who can stay. I don't know if you've got a preference.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, so should we deal with those first and then we'll do the film?
Sure.
So the first question, I'm not sure if anyone will know the answer to this, but I will ask it anyway. So, and it's going back to maybe it's more suited to Julian or Ben, but it's Morag, and she's asking the question: are new long distance trails being set up with adequate hard standings, parking and toilets, water to stop degradation of the natural environment by irresponsible off-grid camping? And I'd also add degradation of the historic environment by irresponsible off-grid camping to that as well. Do you know at all?
The honest answer is I don't. I think, as Julian hinted at, we have not as a region perhaps planned as much for the infrastructure that's necessary to deliver our tourism offer as much as we might have. I think that's the kind of politic answer to that question. I think resources are obviously incredibly stretched just now, but I think it is incumbent on us to think more constructively about this. It certainly is an issue, and we've not necessarily addressed it to the extent we might.
Yeah, I would add to that. I know that the Highland Council has unveiled a new package of funding to improve facilities for particularly that kind of tourism. I think the issue is more that at the time of the inception of the North Coast 500, it coincided with the closure of public toilets around the route, and there was nothing in the way of on-the-ground infrastructural improvements. I think people are realizing that, and there's both from public bodies, but also from local people's own entrepreneurial initiatives. There's an effort being made to absorb that, but in a sense that doesn't necessarily solve the other problem, which is what assumptions do tourists bring based on the way the place is promoted, and how does that influence their practices once they're here. So one side of it, which my research doesn't touch, is the infrastructural material stuff, you know, the tangible stuff, and then the other is sort of looking to shift representation and ways of thinking. So again, it's a complex and multifaceted process, but I think there's a realization of the complexity of the problem, and there's a real effort being made to address it now.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Certainly from the council's perspective, and thank you for mentioning it, Julian. We have the visitor management plan, which is I think £1.5 million has been agreed again, or is in the process of being agreed for the next season as it is, and that's going to include a lot of work to on-site facilities, to the infrastructure, tourist infrastructure, including increased rubbish collection, toilet facilities, all of those bits that really facilitate visitors coming and coming in as responsible way as we can. But it's a massive problem, it's a massive issue, and we're starting from a point where the infrastructure isn't there, and we're trying to play catch up in a very difficult environment. But hopefully we will start to see some changes. We also have the access rangers as well, and a number of them are going to be kept on over the winter season to try and make some of those improvements on some of the sites that are suffering the more significant pressures, to try and give more facilities for visitors. But yeah, it's a really difficult one, and certainly a hot topic. So thank you for that. Right, one for you, Stuart. We have, why was the west or riverside of the Castle Street demolished? It looks like quite a loss to the town fabric. I know there's a story behind that one, Stuart. So
yeah, well, there was a fairly major landslip which took out several of the properties. No one was killed. But I think there were a few injuries, and it was on the back of that the buildings were demolished. They were considered then unsafe afterwards. So, but I do agree. I think it was a loss to the city centre fabric, and I think Castle Street suffers from that. You know, being a one-sided street, I think it's quite a pleasant view you get of the castle, and a lot of people might be attached to that. But I think activating both sides of the street would enrich Castle Street again, and draw people up to the castle. But that was it. It was a landslip. It was quite a significant event in the middle of the 20th century.
Thank you. Not the same reason for Bridge Street, though, unfortunately, which showed on some of your photos there how nice Bridge Street used to look, and what we have now. So it's an interesting change. Okay, should we move on to your video then, Stuart?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I can play it, and for those who are happy to hang around, hopefully you can enjoy it, but I appreciate people have other things to do and may have to go. And hopefully this works, Andrew. Can you see that now? Is it on your screen?
I think something's coming through. Yep, there it is.
Okay, I'll just press play and jump in and tell me if it's not working so well.
Yeah, that's working.
We've been involved here at Inverness Castle for almost 2 years now, helping the Highland Council and High Life Highland to transform these buildings into a new visitor attraction. It's a site that has a history that spans back at least 700 years and well beyond. Relatively recently, at the end of last year, we made applications for planning consent and listed building consent, and it was a big milestone for us recently in obtaining those. We're just also finishing off an enabling contract, and I'm going to take you around and show you some of what's been going on. We're stood now in front of the main front door to Inverness Castle, and you can see very grand front door right on the central axis of the esplanade as you approach. But what's amazing is that up until very recently, if you opened these front doors, you would see the back of a plasterboard partition. The room behind was converted into a courtroom, and they lost that main entrance. And that's a big part of what we're doing in the project, is to reopen the doors, make this the front door to Inverness Castle once again for all the public to enter the building this way. So as part of the enabling contract, we've taken away all of the plasterboard finishes that were on all of these walls. A big moment for us and a big moment for me was when we revealed the front doors behind me. And we're delighted to find that all the original features associated with that are still intact. We found lots of other original features in here too that we weren't expecting to find. So there's original timber dado paneling on all the walls, and there are original stone flags below my feet. One of the main features inside the court building is this grand central staircase, which sits directly in front of you as you come in the main doors of the castle. Before, you would have come in from the side, but now the grandeur of them is revealed as you come up to them. We've taken carpets and screed off of them to reveal the original stone, which is all intact, so we can restore this back to how it once was. Coming up to the top of the grand staircase, and we reach this long corridor that runs the full length of the building. When we first came on board on the project, at the end of these corridors, it was blocked off by a toilet at one end and a printer at the other end. We've cleared out those spaces so you can see the full length again and see out the windows. We've also revealed the original timber dado paneling and original stone flag floors beneath my feet. And off that corridor, there are several rooms at first floor. This room in particular is a good example of a room that was actually subdivided into 7 or 8 different spaces when we first came to the project. In part of the enabling contract, we've cleared out all of those partitions to put it back to one single room as it was originally intended to be. And we've revealed, for example, this great stone vaulted arched roof, which we're going to restore, and the visitor will be able to experience this room as one big impressive space as it was always meant to be. This is the main courtroom in the South Tower, and it's largely how it was when it was built in 1836. It's the biggest space in the 2 buildings, double height, it's 11 metres to the ceiling. And in here, we are looking to conserve the space, restore it, and make some subtle changes so that the public can enjoy it as a large visitor space as part of the visitor experience. Inverness Castle is positioned right in the town centre, and there's no better place to get a sense of that position than up on the roof. And from here, you get this incredible 360-degree panorama right across the whole city. And as part of this project, we've worked really hard to design in a publicly accessible roof terrace. And that's going to happen just in the area behind me here, which sits over the front door of the castle and allows you to share the same view down the Great Glen that the Flora MacDonald statue looks to. In order to inform our design work for this project and how we approach that, is really to try and find out as much as we possibly can about the buildings. So we do that by surveying it ourselves, but also getting the help of specialists in to conduct specialist surveys.
I've been looking for interesting architectural decorations. So it's called architectural paint research. Looking around in the different spaces and trying to open up little windows, we call them exposure windows, trying to figure out what's happened and when it happened and how things have changed. And it's just really quite exciting.
We're stood now between the 2 buildings that make up Inverness Castle. So you've got the original courtroom, which we call the South Tower, and the North Tower, which was built as a prison and then converted later into offices. And this space is going to become enclosed by a new single-storey link building. And the other interesting thing is the modern cell block, which was just behind me until recently, has now been demolished. And for the first time, we're seeing the original door openings on the back of the South Tower and the space as it's going to be in the new link building. The North Tower is a very different building to the South Tower. South Tower was built as a courthouse and has lots of grand ceremonial spaces. And the North Tower, which was built 12 years later, is completely different. It was built as a prison and then later converted into office spaces and more court space. But being built as a prison, the spaces are a lot smaller and tighter, and it doesn't have the same grandeur about it. We're stood now in a room which would have originally been 4 prison cells. And through the works that we've done in enabling work, we've revealed original doors that would have come into the cells. And you can see here, we've also lifted the floors to try and understand the spaces that are available below them for us to run services and so on. This is an example of one of the old cell doors that we've revealed that was covered over in plasterboard. And you can see that it's really tight, small space. And that was symptomatic of the whole building. You came into your cell block, the window was tiny, the bars were over the window. But we're going to try and keep these so that as you go around the building, you can read the story of how it used to be. The prison building was extended in 1900 to create more space for the courtroom. So contrary to these small cellular spaces that exist, there's one big space, and that's through here. We're going to have a look at it. And this is the big courtroom that they extended the building to include. Up until recently, it was full of court furniture, witness boxes, jury boxes, and so on. We've taken all that out and revealed a really fine stripped wooden floor. And now it's a fantastic space. And there's lots of opportunities here to hold functions, events, and so on. We're really looking forward to when people can actually come through the doors and enjoy the space. Present landscaping around Inverness Castle is really quite municipal. It's either grass or it's road. And the site as a whole, therefore, serves well below its potential as an amenity space for local residents and families. So part of our proposals will re-landscape the whole of the area around the castle, including the esplanade and the courtyards to the north and the east. Just over the wall that's behind me is where we're putting that new link building. And so we're going to break a hole through that wall and make a new terrace out here that people can come and enjoy on a summer evening. Hope you've enjoyed this little behind the scenes tour of what we've been up to. You know, this project is going to be a real gateway project for the Highlands. And as a Highlander and an Inverness resident, I really do think that it's going to have a huge legacy, both for local residents, for people across the Highlands, and for all those people who come and visit us.